Hello, it's Book Quote Wednesday and the word is room. And today I'm reading from my space opera novel, The Xenocide Mission, the sequel to His Majesty's Starship. The race that we call the Xenocides, not without reason but also a little unfairly as it turns out, has captured a base crewed jointly by humans and the first breed, and their scientist Oomoing is about to get her first sight of one of each, the sole survivors of the attack. Chapter 3. The airlock door slid into the hull and the asteroid was in front of her, a mountain in space that filled the constricted vision of her space helmet. Oomoing gazed at it hungrily, her eagerness conflicting with the conviction of her senses that the millions of tons of rock were poised above her, ready to fall on top of her at any moment. Even her inexpert eye could tell that the asteroid had been in the wars. She saw the furrows ploughed by the assault squad's lasers, the gobbets of molten rock left in their wake, the 3 surviving assault craft. The attack over, they hung in space next to the rock, sleek and dark. Her eyes settled on a particularly big hole. "Mother of the sky, that must have been a big bang," she said. "I hadn't realized the battle was so fierce." "That was the launch bay for their ship, learned mother," Fleet's voice said in her helmet speakers, with a kind of respect that only comes when someone says something very stupid. "It's where we're going in. Colonel Stormer is keen to meet you." "And I, him." Oomoing covered her embarrassment with genuine feeling. Stormer, the male who had led the attack, would only have been obeying the orders of Marshal of Space Barabadar, but the unreasoning ferocity of such an assault still appalled her. A line strung from the ship's airlock faded into the distance, merging into the colours of the asteroid, and Fleet clipped her suit's harness onto it. "Just step out, learned mother. I'm right behind you." "You've got the equipment?" she asked. "Right here, learned mother." So Oomoing jumped out into space. Her reserve training came back to her, and she didn't make too bad a job of going down the line. It only took a minute. Now she could see that the pit in the surface of the asteroid was indeed artificial, with smooth, regular walls and equipment around them embedded in the rock. It was dark, the only light coming from the end of the pit, and it was like sinking into the gloom of a deep pond with just a small, forlorn bubble of light and warmth at the bottom. A crew of suited soldiers was waiting at the bottom, and by the light of 2 emergency bulbs they unclipped her from the line and led her to a makeshift airlock set into the wall. It took 2 minutes for her and Fleet to be cycled through, and then they were in the asteroid, actually inside an extraterrestrial base, and 2 soldiers were helping her remove her suit. Her helmet came off, and the familiar, slightly stale smell of ship's air came flooding into her olfactory pores. Oomoing looked up and down the passage. It was a circular tunnel bored into the rock, and a floor was provided by a grating laid along it. The grating was completely redundant in the lack of gravity, and it immediately set Oomoing to hypothesizing. Subdued red light set flush into the rock emphasized the natural chill of the asteroid's interior. Colonel Stormer came out of the gloom to meet her, pulling himself with his feeding arms along a line strung down the passage. "Wakefulness," he said, "and are we glad to see you." He was a grizzled, middle-aged male, and his expression was dour. Oomoing was about to express surprise and delight at such a warm welcome when Fleet spoke instead. "The supplies are being unloaded, worthy mother." "Good, we can use them." Stormer was older than Fleet and had much more prestige. His bow to Oomoing was almost equal to equal. "Learned mother, I am instructed to place myself and my troops at your disposal, subject to security restrictions. We've already started trying to inventory the equipment we found here, but we will value your scientists' input." "Excellent," Oomoing said. "I suggest we start by sharing. I am anxious to find out everything you know." "I'm sorry, I was specifically told by Marshal of Space Barabadar not to share." Stormer didn't look all that sorry, he almost looked relieved. "I beg your pardon," Oomoing said. "I was specifically told—" "I insist on a sharing." Oomoing was outraged. "How am I expected to do my job without proper background clearance?" "I gather it's a matter of... without proper background knowledge," she said. "I gather it's a matter of clearance, learned mother." "Clearance?" The talons of her hunting arm slid out by reflex, and Oomoing didn't know whether to laugh or cuff him for his insolence. Doing the latter in front of the fleet would be bad military discipline. Listen to yourself, loyal son. I'm cleared to be on the top secret extraterrestrial base. I'm cleared to study their equipment and try to work out how they travel faster than light. I'm authorized to study the creatures themselves, but I'm not cleared for the details? Precisely, learned mother, Stormer said, impassive. Oomoing could see she wasn't going to get anywhere. She began to compose a blistering complaint delivered to Barabadar. In the meantime, then let's start with the extraterrestrials, she said. Of course, learned mother. That's why you're here. The Outlanders are this way. Stormer pulled himself back down the passage, followed by Oomoing, followed by Fleet. Oomoing, still not used to its way of travelling, found that the trick was to use her feeding arms for pulling on the line and her hunting arms for the time she pulled too hard or swung away from the line towards the walls. Every time they came to a junction or passed the entrance to a room or a chamber, she looked yearningly down it, wondering what marvels of extraterrestrial technology lay that way. How much of the base have you explored? She said. A fraction, Stormer said, without looking around. It's a maze and it's big. We've sealed off this local area and repressurized it, but we just didn't have the gear to do a full job. But now we've got the supplies, we'll be able to do it properly. Oomoing had already worked out that the plan had been for Stormer's men to sneak up on the base in small, lightly armed spacecraft, and for a much larger ship, her ship, to bring supplies after the base was taken. No one seemed to have expected that the supply ship would stop off at Habitat 1 and wait for her to wake. It seemed a bit of an oversight. But you have troops exploring the rest of the place? Of course. I can show you a map of what we found if you like. These Outlanders dug in deep. That word again. Oomoing remembered her own reaction upon learning of the extraterrestrial's existence. Stormer, a military male not given to scientific lines of thought, would have felt it all the more strongly. She felt the dislike, the loathing behind the word. To him, Outlander was barely removed from not us, and it was probably only politeness in front of a female that kept him from using the ultimate term of contempt. Thank you, I will want to see it, Oomoing said. My brief is to assess the entire situation. Well, you can start here. They had stopped outside the doorway, and hanging by the doorway were 2 empty spacesuits. She could immediately tell which suit belonged to which extraterrestrial. A basic eye for shape told her that the wearer of one would have stood on 2 limbs and have 2 limbs free, while the other would have used all 4 for standing. Seeing the clothes that the creatures wore, but without the creatures inside them, somehow emphasized the sheer alienness of their species. She reached out a feeding arm and caressed the alien material, which wasn't unlike her own suit. Are you getting anything, learned mother? Stormer said. You're the expert spacer, worthy son, Oomoing replied. They probably tell you more than they tell me. Stormer shrugged, as if to say, whatever. The tall one had this, he added. From a box he produced a narrow circle of plastic. It was worn on one wrist. Oomoing took it in a feeding hand, turned it over and over. White, tough plastic. Embedded in it was what looked like a headshot of its owner and a series of black and white parallel lines, probably some kind of computer code. An identity tag? She said. Stormer's people all carried something similar. It occurred to her that if they could only read that code... Probably, Stormer agreed, sounding surprised that he and the learned mother could agree on something. But press that red plastic square there. Oomoing did, and a holo appeared next to the bracelet. It was a shapeless mass of colour that hung in midair, the size of one feeding fist. It was a photograph of something, but unlike a still photograph which anyone could look at, it was attuned to the frequency of vision of an alien race. Eyes other than hers were meant to understand it. And that's all it does? She said. No hidden keys, no access to computers, anything like that? As far as we can tell. I see. She put it in her pocket. Well, looking at their discarded equipment is all very interesting, but... Through here, Stormer said. He pulled himself through the door next to the suits. After a moment to collect her thoughts and control her excitement, Oomoing followed, and she finally saw what she had crossed millions of miles to see. They're doing it again, Stormer said, without a lot of interest. The 2 extraterrestrials were kept in a large circular room. Stormer had chosen it simply as a secure place to put his captives, with no idea what the room was for. There was only the one entrance, and 2 armed sentries waited by it. The two creatures lay still and motionless against the far wall in what Oomoing recognised as a free-fall hammocks. Apart from them and a cubicle containing a free-fall chemical toilet, the room was bare, though it stank. This would be the smell of unwashed extraterrestrial. She wondered if they found it as unpleasant. Oomoing feasted her eyes on the two forms of the hammocks. She was already familiar with their general appearance and the facts of the case from reports that had been beamed to her on the way here, but actually to see them. Are they still keeping to the timetable? She said. By and large, they do it less and less. The first time Long and Short, as she thought of them, had lapsed into this coma, there had been a major panic amongst Stormer's men and frantic, long-range, time-delayed calls to her on the ship, asking her advice. A kin deprived of resources would lapse into the small sleep, but these two had food, so what was happening? Were they dying? The fuss had died down abruptly when someone actually approached the two, and suddenly they started moving again. When it happened again, half a day later, Oomoing had given orders that they were not to be disturbed. The creatures always got into their hammocks before passing out, so obviously they were expecting it. She surmised it was indeed like the small sleep, some kind of resource-conserving coma, just one which happened on a regular basis. Or maybe it was just a way of passing the time when nothing was happening. It clearly wasn't life-threatening, and that was the main thing. How are they eating? She said. They drink the water we provide, Stormer said. And you remember what we decided were emergency rations from their canteen? The tall one fell on them when we produced them, but since then it's gone off its appetite. The short one hasn't touched a bite. That's worrying. Oomoing gazed in concern at the unmoving form of Short in its hammock. As the learned mother pleases, Stormer said, and Oomoing remembered that Short had apparently dispatched 5 of his soldiers before being subdued. Can I see this stuff you've been feeding Long? I mean, the tall one? She said. Stormer nodded at one of his men, who handed Oomoing a slim, rectangular object wrapped in some kind of plastic. She looked at it curiously, turning it over and over in her feeding hands. It was about the same size as 2 talons side by side, and was covered in what she suspected was script. The plastic crinkled in a grip, and the tab at either end practically begged, "Pull me." So she did. The plastic peeled away and revealed a dark brown, waxy substance. It was divided into rows of 3 squares, and without any difficulty she broke an entire row off. A strange odour, pungent but very rich, tickled her olfactory pores. Embedded in the broken edge, she could see what looked like some kind of dried fruit. "Remind me why we decided these were emergency rations?" she said. "Well, they come out of a machine mounted on the wall," Stormer said. "If I'd built this place, I'd want emergency rations to be easily accessible to anyone who needed them. And smell it, learned mother, it's bursting with energy." Oomoing sniffed the dark slab and had to agree. And yet, she looked back at Long, the extraterrestrial. I'm getting this all wrong. Start again. Oomoing sniffed the dark slab and had to agree. And yet, she looked back at Long, the extraterrestrial had gone off its feed. Or maybe they didn't need to eat that much. Or maybe they needed a more varied diet. She could try and second-guess them forever. It was time to start using Arabadar's authority. "I want the tall one let out," she said. "I beg your pardon," Stormer said, so outraged she even forgot the learned mother. "It's the safer one, isn't it?" "Well, well, yes, the tall one hasn't killed any of my people, if that's what you mean." "Then I want it let out." "Don't worry," Oomoing held up all 4 hands to placate him. "You won't give it free rein. I want to follow it, with an armed guard, of course, just to see where it goes and what it does. It might show us interesting things, and it probably has a better idea of how to look after its kind than we do. Now, please do it." "An armed guard? I'll follow it personally," Stormer muttered. "Well, as the learned mother pleases, we'd better revive them." "How do you do that?" "Nothing simpler." Stormer kicked over to Long and slapped his hands together loudly. "Get moving, come on. The learned mother has come halfway across the solar system to see you. On your feet." Long twitched, and its eyes opened, and it recoiled at the sight of Stormer hanging over it. It may not have understood the words, but it seemed to understand the gestures, and it slowly freed an arm and released the tabs that opened the hammock up. It came free and pushed itself gently off the wall. Even in free fall, Oomoing fancied she saw a measured caution about its movements. Oomoing drank in the sight. The transmission she had received on the way here still hadn't done the creature justice. It was long and lanky, a thin torso, small head, topped by a short fuzzy mane of dark brown hair, 4 feeble limbs, all part of a stretched body much taller than the Colonel or any other male, though only a head or so above Oomoing's own height. Its skin was pale pink and looked clammy to the touch. The eyes were recognisable, at least Oomoing assumed that was what they were, though she had to remind herself to take nothing for granted. Still, they were in roughly the same place as Akin's own eyes, and as the eye had evolved independently on Homeworld in a multitude of species, she didn't see why extraterrestrials shouldn't have something similar. She wondered how much of the spectrum they could take in. Between them was something else sticking out from the face. She presumed it was some kind of extraterrestrial organ, and reserved judgment for the time being on what it might be for. Long was wearing two garments, one covering the haunches with its legs sticking out below, and one wrapped around its torso with its arms and head sticking out of their respective holes at the upper end of the body. Its limbs were drawn up together, and it was rubbing itself. There was a very thin pelt on the arms and the legs, and the hairs there, but not on the head for some reason, were standing upright. Oomoing could understand perfectly. It was hardly wearing anything, and it was very cold in here. "The learned mother wants to see you, so move over here," Stormer shouted, but Oomoing was already moving towards it. She looked into Long's eyes. Each had a white background, a blue circle, and the dark pupil within it. She wanted to feel the creature, see if the skin really was as clammy as it looked, learn the texture of that fuzz on the top of its head. She reached out. Long's pupils dilated, and with an incoherent shout, "Where from? Which organ did it use for speech?" it leapt across the room. It came to a rest with its back against the wall, the other side of the chamber. "Stand to!" Stormer shouted, though his guards at the entrance to the chamber already had their guns at the ready. "Don't worry," Oomoing said. "He knows better than to argue." She looked at Long in fascination. That stance, that reaction reminded her of... Yes, she had it. She studied Long with her stalker senses. Amplified vision, smell, hearing. She could hear a fast thumping heartbeat. The smell of extraterrestrial was suddenly stronger. Its respiration was right up. "I think it's frightened," she said. "Even terrified." "Frightened?" Stormer said scornfully. "You think it's just an animal?" "I didn't say that. Maybe its species kept the fear sense when they became sentient." Stormer plainly thought her on-the-fly theory was evolutionist nonsense, but he wasn't going to say so. "What would it have to be frightened of, though, Mother?" he said. "We're not going to eat it." "Maybe it doesn't know that." Oomoing decided to content herself with a visual inspection for the time being. "Anyway, this is all speculation. Colonel, you want to supervise this procedure? I suggest you get your gun out. Fleet, you've got the camera?" Fleet held up the device he had brought over from the ship. "Then let's go. Are you recording? Good." She looked into the lens. "I am Oomoing of the Family Institute. Present with me are third son of the family Barabadar and..." She looked at Stormer. "Stormer, first son of the family Dadoy," Stormer said. "And two other males acting as armed guards," said Oomoing. "I am about to release the tall extraterrestrial captured during the recent engagement." And that is the start of a beautiful friendship, if you read the rest of the book. Remember, you can buy my books at www.benjeeps.com. See you next time.